Archie Goodwin is a native of Kansas City, Missouri, who first worked on Leonard Starr's on-stage comic strip in 1959. From there, he moved upward in the magazine writing field very swiftly until, in the early 1960s, he became associated with James Warren's black and white comic magazines. And the stories he wrote for Creepy, Eerie, and Blazing Combat were considered to be the best work of their kind for that period, rivaling the famous EC comic line for realism and intensity of storytelling. Now, since those early days, Archie has earned a reputation as one of the finest writers and editors working in the comics field today. I cornered the reserved, sometimes self-effacing Goodwin when he was in San Francisco recently, and he agreed to stay still long enough for me to talk about those grand days when Creepy, Eerie, and Blazing Combat were among the most popular black and white magazines of their time. Archie, Creepy, and Eerie were your first major magazines back in 1964, and they were very reminiscent of the old EC comics of the 50s. Was this your and Jerry Warren's intention at that time?
Very definitely. It was, in fact, kind of like a dream come true for me. I started out as an EC fan, and to suddenly have my first job in comics be more or less carrying on what I thought was that tradition was just a terrific thing. In fact, it's kind of like it fulfilled all my ambitions, and somehow it's been downhill ever since. You know, I started at the top, and I've had to fight to stay there.
Archie, simultaneous with Creepy and Eerie, you brought out a very excellent war magazine, Blazing Combat, which only lasted for about 4 issues. Was the magazine a victim of the Vietnam War period?
It's hard to tell for certain, but we did have a problem when we began doing anti-war stories in that part of our circulation was dependent upon reaching Army posts, and an order apparently came out to remove all the Blazing Combats from any Army posts or Army facilities. So that definitely hurt. And I think we were also maybe just a little bit ahead of time with it. At the time we started doing it, people didn't know that much about Vietnam. It was hard to get research on it. It was a few years after that that the Vietnam protests and all really heated up. So we were a little premature with the anti-war attitude, too.
Obviously, Harvey Kurtzman was your inspiration and guiding spirit behind that magazine.
Definitely a major influence. The things he did for EC, Two-Fisted Tales, and Frontline Combat certainly showed me the way I thought war comics should be done. There was no way to top what he did. At best, we could kind of try to carry forward some of the anti-war sentiment a little stronger since it was later on. But definitely the blueprint for that type of magazine was really what Harvey Kurtzman did.
To get back to Creepy and Eerie for a moment, did you enjoy writing the stories for the first few years?
Oh, I loved doing it. It's horror stories like that, to me, I don't know if they always come off that way, but when I'm writing them, it's like a form of black humor. I think it's one of the things with Stephen King now gets a little bit of that in the stuff he writes too, where you want to scare people, but at the same time, I love the monsters. I think as a kid, you feel awkward as a teenager and all anyway, and you identify with monsters anyhow. And I had a lot of fun with that. I would, be laughing and chortling while I'm writing about vampires and werewolves and all. I really liked it.
We were discussing the influence of movies and Universal movies and stuff.
The Warren books, I think one of the influences besides EC was the actual, the old horror movies that were just making it on TV about that time with Shock Theater and all the old Universal movies. There's an interest and kind of a love for that kind of material in the stuff we were doing for Warren, too. Picking up on the werewolves, the vampires, a lot of Dracula stories, a lot of Frankenstein monster-type stories. Very, very Boris Karloff, Universal influenced. That was a big part of what we were doing, too. Picking up on Warren's famous monsters and kind of carrying it into comics material.
What was one of the amazing factors at that time with the two magazines is you were able to get a lot of the old EC artists to come back, like Joe Orlando and Wally Wood.
we were very lucky in that respect, in that there was sort of like a doldrum period in comics. The Marvel stuff that Stan Lee was doing was just beginning to take off, but other than that, not a lot had been happening in comics. So you had this tremendous talent that really didn't have that much to do. And about at the time Warren started that magazine, those people were all available. If you'd started the magazines a year later, a year and a half later, none of them might have been available because more work began generating then. So we were lucky, very lucky.
Did you find that the artists sort of lived up to your expectations 10 years later, in most cases?
In many cases, I thought they were even better than I gave them credit for being, because the Warren books were in black and white. That means the artist doesn't have color to enhance the work or anything. He has to do it with
Just to carry
technique.
it all with his technique. Yeah.
And those guys were amazing. They branched out using washes, using crosshatch, zipatones, craft tints, all these different black and white rendering techniques that they sort of experimented with, which were very good.
Archie, after the creepy and eerie era, you left to go to work with Al Williamson on the Secret Agent Corrigan series. What was it like collaborating with Al Williamson?
Well, actually, we did it for 13 years. It's one of the best-kept secrets in newspaper syndication. I don't know where the strip was appearing, but King Features would send us checks every week, and we would send in material every week. I think it had very big European sales, but it hardly appeared in the United States, so not too many people were aware of it. But we did it for, over a dozen years.
What was it like collaborating with Williamson at that time?
It's great. Al and I love working together. We've been friends. He was one of the first people I met in comics. I met him when I was in art school. We'd gone to the same art school. He was a few years ahead of me. And I met him through school, and we've sort of been friends ever since. We go back about 25 years. So it's always great working with Al. We work easily together. I'm a slow writer, so sometimes Al gets a little nervous waiting for the scripts and things like that, but he does a beautiful job with it. It's not hard. I can just write a very simple description. Al sends back a beautiful picture. It's very easy working for him. It makes you look good as a writer when you work with an artist like that.
Archie, you moved over to Marvel Comics about 1968. What was the company like at that time? What was happening in the comics field?
Well, Marvel was, at that time, obviously becoming the biggest thing in comics. It wasn't the biggest selling comics line at the time. About 5 years later, it was the biggest selling comics company. But it was just, that's where all the attention was. Articles were appearing about Marvel in the Village Voice, Esquire. People were beginning to pick up on it. There was this excitement about comics kind of coming alive again. And I went up to meet Stan Lee. I had to take a test. Even though I'd been writing for Warren, they would give me pages of an Iron Man story that Stan was working on and said, write sample dialogue for these things. So I took it home nervously at night, doing my best, trying to get it done overnight, rushing in with it. Stan looked at it, oh, this is good, you're writing Iron Man.
Just like that?
Just like that, yeah.
You wrote Iron Man, Fantastic Four, Doctor Strange. What were the most favorite comic magazines that you worked on at that time, your personal favorites?
Well, I think I really liked writing the Fantastic Four, which I considered to be probably the best comic done at the time, as Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did it. It was like a big thrill. Stan went off to write a script with Alain Resnais, the French movie director. Needed someone to fill in for him, so they asked me to do it. That was like a really big thrill, coming in on what I felt was Marvel's best comic. And trying, I didn't try to top anyone, just trying to kind of keep my head above water on it was exciting and a lot of fun.
You were also associated with DC for about a year editing the detective series.
Sure, I like to keep moving before they find out
the real you.
Anything. That's right, you know.
And
always present a moving target.
How did DC differ from Marvel in the way that it operated?
DC was a lot more tightly structured. In terms of the way they did things, in the way the company was run, just not quite as loose and free-floating. Marvel was always, we got to get this out, let's write this, draw this, hurry, hurry, hurry. DC was longer deadlines, a lot more concerned with production techniques and things like that, but not quite the excitement. Although I think I was able to do good things at DC, working on Batman, and then most especially Manhunter with Walt Simonson, which is because it was a backup feature that we could kind of do anything we want to with. We were able to do a lot with it, and it's sort of still remembered today.